like, yeah, I'm done with Jennifer Lawrence. I'm done with the character of Jennifer Lawrence.
I wringed every last drop out of you.
Yeah, exactly. I've done all I can. Go back to the X-Men franchise and David O. Russell and see what happens there.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we like to democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to talk about a movie that really means something to them, that connected to them, or something that they grew up with. So in this episode, I'm joined by Jefferson Grubbs. Jefferson, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you share my passion for movies and more specifically my passion for the Academy Awards. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you have going on and especially your latest project?
Yeah, so I've been an Oscar obsessive for many, many years, and I've always dreamed of having my own Oscar blog, and I finally realized that would never happen unless I just did it. So this year I finally launched my site. It's called Thin Gold Line. We went live the week before the Oscars, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. Everyone should check it out. It's at thin-gold-line. We have polls, we have reviews of us and Captain Marvel. We have very early 2019 Oscar predictions up already. And starting later this month, we're going to be doing a Decade in Review series where every month for the rest of the year, we look back on one of the years from this decade. So we'll be starting with 2010, looking back on the Best Picture winner, the box office, and making, best of the year lists looking back. So that'll be fun. You should definitely check it out.
Yeah, and that's actually, like, I feel like I was familiar with you from social media and things like that. I may have even been I think I was following your page, like your personal profile, but then I saw that you had posted about starting the website, and I was like, oh, well, that's a perfect person to have on the podcast. It was right around, as you mentioned, it was right around the time of the Oscars, and I've been following that obsessively since I was a kid. I think the one that I really kind of honed in on was the Titanic year, was where I was subscribed to Entertainment Weekly at the time, and following all the nominees and who were the odds that they were going to be nominated, blah, blah, blah. And I know a lot of people kind of write off the Oscars in a way because it's like, oh, it's all the politics behind it and things like that. And yeah, that's true. But it's also just so much fun, like the guessing game and trying to strategize, like who's going to win what. And are these nominees going to cancel each other out? And is Glenn Close going to win this year? Or is
not this year.
Lady Gaga, not this year. Or is Lady Gaga going to slip in as an underdog or whatever, where the film's like the gaining traction or things like that. So I guess before we get into the movie that we're going to discuss in this episode, I feel like, well, what did you think of this year's Oscars that just passed, where Green Book won Best Picture? And then it was interesting. I think it's one of the only years that I can recall where all the Best Picture nominees won at least one award. Like even Vice got, I think, makeup.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that is rare. The last time it happened in 2014, the year of Birdman and Boyhood.
Okay.
But this was the only other time in the era of the expanded ballot, at least. Maybe it was more common when there are only 5 Best Picture nominees. It was probably easier for all of them to go home with something. But yeah, definitely since we expanded, it's only happened twice. So it was nice to see everything go home with a little something. It was a very turbulent year. I think everyone is a little relieved that it's finally over, with all the drama from the Academy itself to the controversial movies in the race. But, when all is said and done, I think certainly the ceremony itself, I think, went better than almost anyone expected it to. Mm-hmm. I actually think not having a host was great. I thought the ceremony went so well, so smoothly. It had a really good pace, without having to grind to a halt to send Armie Hammer next door with a hot dog gun. Nobody needs that stuff. And I think it went great. I think what you need is really strong presenters, and the ceremony really had that. Obviously, Bohemian Rhapsody is our most winning film of the year, and Green Book is our Best Picture winner, and I don't think that's necessarily reflective of the year of 2018 in cinema. So, but it is true to a certain extent that the Oscars are as defined by what lost as what won. People will always remember that Brokeback is the film that was unjustly robbed of a Best Picture win. And I don't know if it would be as enduring of a classic today if it had won in a strange way. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. I think, 5-10 years from now, this year will be one of the weird ones in history where everyone just scratches their head and go, how on earth did Roma not win? But
was that the one you were rooting for, the Best Picture nominee?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a masterpiece. I think Cuarón is brilliant, and I mean, I would have been happy with The Favorite as well. That's a great film too. But in terms of sheer, achievement in filmmaking and cultural importance, it was hard to beat Roma last year. So
yeah, I think the day after the telecast, I did an episode of the podcast, just like 45 minutes of me just rambling on about going through all the winners and what I thought of it and all that, because I didn't, even more than most years, I really tried to catch up with as many of the nominated films as possible. Definitely all the Best Pictures and acting nominees and things like that. And it was frustrating for me as well to see things like Bohemian Rhapsody and Green Book when movies like The Favorite, as you mentioned, Black Klansman, and I even loved Black Panther, were in there. Roma, I need to rewatch, I think, because I did see it on Netflix, but I feel like your opinion of that movie is so dependent on whether you see it on the big screen or not.
Yeah.
I think that. Did you catch it in a theater at all near you?
I did. The first time I saw it on the big screen at the Philadelphia Film Festival. I did rewatch it again on Netflix in my home. I mean, I have a good home theater setup with surround sound and a big projector screen and everything. So that's not a bad experience either. But it's so much about the sound and the big visuals and just the immersion of the experience. So
the Oscar-winning cinematography.
Yeah, it's so gorgeous. And yeah, I'm sorry for Glenn Close that she didn't get her win, but I'm so happy. Olivia Colman's win was the highlight of the night, and if she hadn't won, The Favorite would have been the only Best Picture nominee that went home empty-handed. So I'm glad it got something. And Glenn Close she'll probably get her Oscar for that Sunset Boulevard movie that they're making.
What it sounds like, yeah. So yeah, you mentioned how crazy the Oscars have been this year with the most popular film category that was announced and then revoked after tremendous backlash, the host thing and all that. So that this season having been such a roller coaster ride, is part of you like, man, I couldn't have had this idea to start my Oscar site last year before all of this?
Yeah. There was definitely more than enough news to cover this year.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. It's sort of fun to follow just as a spectator without.
It is. For sure.
Covering each ridiculous new development. So. Yeah, it would have been fun to cover, and it was also kind of a relief to be diving in, just in time for the ceremony itself. And now I can get in on the ground floor of this coming season. And
exactly.
It's crazy to think about because I've done all my early predictions, but this time last year nobody had even heard of Green Book. I know we all have our eyes on like The Irishman and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but anything could happen. We have such a long way to go. Every year, this time every year, we think we have a handle on at least a vague idea of how things are going to turn out, but we so often don't. So that's what's so exciting about it. I think there are so many things come out of the woodwork, and whether your favorites win or not, it's always a wild ride. And I don't know. There are so many things about last year's race that just continue to mystify me. I don't know how Bradley Cooper did not win every Best Actor award. I don't know. It's bizarre to me, and how Toni Collette wasn't even nominated when she won I've never seen and win as many critical prizes as she and Ethan Hawke did, and neither of them got nominated. Like it was a weird year, but there are things to be happy about and things not. So
well, yeah. I mean, as you said, with regardless of how you feel about Green Book, I don't think anybody was saying what's going to win Best Picture. I think that Peter Farrelly movie
right
coming out next year. It's like, what?
Now Peter Farrelly has 2 Oscars, and Alfred Hitchcock died with 0. So
jeez. So
the world makes sense.
One last Oscar related thing, and then we'll transition into the topic at hand. So this weekend, Us is tearing up the box office with like 70 million, in its debut weekend, and there's already, I think, a lot of people questioning whether whether it has a shot at the Academy Awards next year, being a horror film, and the Academy is not usually keen on genre pictures. Do you think that it has any? Do you think it has the? I mean, granted, it's way too early to really call it, but what does your kind of gut feeling say as far as the possibility that it might crack into, if not Best Picture, maybe Best Director, or even especially Best Actress, considering Jordan Peele's history winning for Get Out and all of that?
Yeah. Well, I am ashamed to admit that I'm not one of the millions of people who have seen it yet. I had a crazy busy weekend, and it's driving me crazy that I haven't made it to the theater yet. I'm planning on seeing it tomorrow. I did have one of the writers from my site saw it and reviewed it. But based on everything that I've heard, I mean, in my early predictions, before the movie even opened, in my early predictions, the only category I had it in was original screenplay. Mm-hmm. I don't think, my hunch is that it will not be a picture director play like Get Out was. I know a lot of people are stumping for Lupita Nyong'o, and it would be great to see her get acknowledged, especially since this is literally the first lead role of her entire career.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about. Yeah. Since she already has an Oscar. She's been in Star Wars,
but she's never headlined a movie before. And
right,
yeah, and most of the movies she's made since 12 Years a Slave have been like CGI characters in Star Wars and Jungle Book and all that. So it's great to see her face. It's great to see her headlining a movie. But I don't know if Toni Collette couldn't do it last year. I don't see any way it happens for her this year either, unless the Academy, does turn out to love the movie a lot more than I think they will. I mean, the movie, it's not that it's not well received, but it just seems not. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a cultural phenomenon in the same way that Get Out was. Right. So I could still see screenplay happening if they don't want to completely ignore it. I think the sound categories and score are also potentially in play from what I hear. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be a huge above the line player.
Well, I think a part of that is too that Us is also rife with social commentary, but it's not nearly as overt as it is in Get Out. Right. And I think that really, in the year, in a time where race and all of that is even more in the headlines than it has been in the years past, I think Get Out just struck at just the right moment. Just politically and socially and everything to catch on in the way that it did. And I think that's probably what helped it stay in the mix for so long. And it'll be interesting to see if Us has legs in that same way, even though as far as the filmmaking is concerned, it's definitely top notch and worthy of recognition. But I don't know if the Academy will view it as quite air quotes prestige-y enough, right, to be whatever elevated horror is, which I've seen that term bandied about. I'm like, do you just mean a good horror movie? What is that supposed to mean?
Right.
So
like Get Out was already a reach for them in terms of genre, and that was. Only part horror. It was also part comedy and part, social commentary, like you said, whereas Get Out is leaning way more heavily into just plain horror. And we all know that's not their favorite genre. So
exactly. All right. Well, we'll see. We'll definitely keep an eye on Thin Gold Line for coverage of if anything changes with Us and its Oscar chances going forward. So just to announce this episode, we're going to be talking about the Darren Aronofsky film Mother. So let's listen to a little bit of the trailer right now.
They've come here to see me.
Come quick! You're insane! You're insane!
All I'm trying to do is bring life into this house. Open the door to new people, new ideas. I'm so sorry.
Get out of my house! You give and you give and you give. It's just never enough.
So that was a little bit of the trailer for Mother from writer-director Darren Aronofsky. So Jefferson, you sent when I reached out to you to do the podcast, you sent me a list of a bunch of different things, but Mother's the one that really stuck out to me, and I think it's one that you mentioned as one of your favorite movies. Just because I felt like it would be an interesting conversation, because my take on the film is much more mixed than yours is. So tell me a little bit about, for listeners, I guess, that aren't familiar with the movie, what it is and why you chose it.
Yeah, I think the sheer fact that you can say, oh, Mother is one of my favorite movies, and people will instantly have a reaction. They'll either be like, yeah, me too, or they'll be like, what are you talking about? That's one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Tell me more.
Like, that's, right there is exactly the reason I wanted to talk about it. I love Darren Aronofsky. Requiem for a Dream was so formative for me when I was younger. I mean, that movie scarred me. I think it scars everyone who sees it. And obviously Black Swan is brilliant. I'm a big defender of The Fountain. I think it's beautiful and brilliant. I was so excited when I first heard about Mother, and I remember so vividly, I was in a movie theater seeing another movie, and a preview for it came on, and I'd already seen like the official trailer, but the ad that was playing in this theater was different. It wasn't the official trailer. It was sort of just like a quicker little promo that said, it had the tagline like, you will never forget or you will always remember the first time you saw Mother, something like that. And I was like, I have to see this movie. I cannot wait. Everything about the trailers, the music and the visuals and everything. I was so pumped. And that promo was not wrong. I will never forget my first time seeing that in the theater. The sounds that the crowd was making, just the pure what the fuckness of it all. It was unforgettable. And I instantly, when I saw it with a group of friends, and I'm pretty sure I was the only one in my group of friends who liked it. And they were all like, what was that? And I was like, it was amazing. And I went home and I told my husband, I just saw the weirdest movie I've ever seen. You have to go. And I went back the next day to see it a second time. And
wow.
I just watched it for the third time. I just watched it for the first time since theaters, actually. In preparation for this, I revisited it. And I just think it's so bold and weird, and the performances are incredible, and it feels like someone's fever dream.
Oh, for sure.
It feels like stepping into someone else's like nightmare. I didn't know what to expect the first time I saw it. I thought I was in for like a home invasion horror movie. And it definitely borrows elements of that, but it goes in so many unexpected directions. Well, before I say any more, I want to hear your reactions upon your first viewing too.
So I guess it's a testament to, like, I'm not nearly as high on this movie as you are, and it's a testament to the statement that Aronofsky is making. And I'm hit or miss with him. Like, I really liked in a certain manner of speaking, Requiem for a Dream, in that it like there are sequences in that, kind of like this film, that you're never gonna forget, like the montage scenes in there, and like the Ellen Burstyn kind of hallucinations with the game show and all of that. It's like seared into my memory. I really love Black Swan, and I was one of those people that I guess didn't quite get the praise for The Fountain, things like that. And I know, because I have friends that love that movie, and I think it's just one that either hits you or it doesn't, and it either resonates with you or not. And that, not to say that it's a great movie or a terrible movie. It's just, it's very subjective. And Darren Aronofsky's movies tend to be that way. I have a really close friend who, she and I, every once in a while, when we talk about movies, we'll bring up Black Swan, because she really doesn't like it. And I was like praising it when it came out. Like, it was so great. And she's like, so I'll probably have her on in a subsequent episode to talk about that. So with Mother, it's a testament to the impact of the film, that I was going to rewatch it and then just didn't have time. My father-in-law's in town this weekend and everything. And I felt like, in a way, honestly, I didn't really need to rewatch it, because I remember it so vividly. The sink's not braced yet, and the whole, like, the way the third act goes, and obviously, and the other thing is that this came out. So September or so in 2017. I had a 10-month-old daughter. She's now almost 2.5 at that time. So the whole thing with the baby, the birthing of the baby, and all that, was like, oh my God, this is it was traumatic for me, who had an infant at point. So I remember all of that very, very vividly. it's one of those films that I respect what it's going for. I don't really 100%. I don't know, because we'll have to talk about our interpretations in a little bit, because there's multiple different ways to read this. And after it came out, there were of course a billion think pieces on this is what the real meaning of Mother, and this is the ending explained, and all of them felt like they had different takeaways from it. There's people that see it as a biblical allegory. There's people that see it as more of a kind of analysis of like the creative process and how, maybe a commentary on Darren Aronofsky himself and his filmmaking and the toll that takes on his relationships, because he'd only been divorced from Rachel Weisz for I think a few years before this movie came out. And I think I even remember seeing somebody noting that woman at the very beginning kind of almost resembles Rachel Weisz a little bit. So questioning and not to add to that, the fact that during the production of this film, he and Jennifer Lawrence were kind of got into a relationship and broke up shortly thereafter. So it's like there's all these levels to it that you're just like, okay, so is it Mother Earth? Is it like literally like the creation part of it? So it's one of those films that I don't feel like necessarily is for me. It doesn't resonate or connect with me in that same way, but I admire what it's trying to do, even though I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna keep that over here and and let other people engage with it maybe more closely. And like I said, part of that I think is the whole baby sequence that kind of like threw me off, and I was I think really turned off by that. I mean, if you make it to the movie, if you make it that far into this movie, that's the part where you're like, yeah, I'm walking out. Like I could see people reacting to it that viscerally just because the film goes completely off the deep end. So So I guess plot wise, there isn't much plot into this film, I guess. So we already talked about why you chose the movie and kind of your initial reaction to it. So I think for the most part, there's so much to talk about here. I think we should just jump into the review section. This is a 2-year-old movie, and this is not a spoiler-sensitive podcast ultimately. So we're just going to delve into it like full on. Spoilers ahead. If you hadn't seen Mother, definitely check it out. You'll either love it or hate it. But either way, you'll have a reaction. Let's put it that way. So plot-wise, the movie is pretty, I don't want to say straightforward, but like grounded, I guess, the first half. And it's just he's a writer struggling with his latest. I guess it's a poem. He's a poet, so I guess he's working on a book of poetry or a poem, a specific work, and he's frustrated with that. And she's been fixing up the house. So, what is your interpretation of the film? I guess up to this point until like all hell breaks loose. Do you buy into more of the biblical allegory of it, or the I guess there's probably more than those two, the environmental or the let's see, how many interpretations are there, and which one do you prescribe to, I guess?
The first time I saw it, like I said, I was expecting a home invasion horror movie type film, and so I was so thrown when that wasn't really happening, and I was so delighted by how the first act of the movie, the first half of the film, it's really funny. I think it's underrated as a comedy. I think especially once Michelle Pfeiffer shows up, she just chews that scenery, and it's this whole comedy of manners and these uninvited house guests overstaying their welcome. I wasn't really looking for that allegory my first time through. I was sort of just on this wild ride, and I saw it like opening night, so all the think pieces hadn't really come out yet. And then I read a little bit more before I went in for my second viewing 1 or 2 days later, and so I knew to be looking for the biblical allegory that time. And the first time through, I did pick up on the themes of like creationism and then the death and rebirth and all that. But then once I knew to be looking for the biblical allegory, yeah, it's really there. And then especially my third time through, I was like, oh yeah, this is just like a literal retelling of the Bible, like beat for beat. You have
Cain and Abel and all of that. Yeah.
God and Mother Earth, and there's the Garden of Eden and the forbidden fruit, and Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel, and then the flood that drives all the people away, and then they gradually come back and start destroying the planet, and then he sends his son, and they kill his son, and then the ending. It's so there is that. I mean, but in some ways, the biblical interpretation is the least interesting, I think, just because it is the most blatant.
I agree.
Like that is the framework in which the movie exists, but I don't think that's really the point. Like if that's the deepest you go in the analysis, then that's the most surface level, I think. I'm more interested in like you said, the allegory of the creative process that you mentioned, with him being a poet and the toll that process takes on a person, and more importantly on the people around them. Right. And I think it's full of angst about our planet and the state of the planet Earth and what we're doing to it and what it's going to do to us if we keep treating it with such disregard. The film really feels like a primal scream, and he said in interviews that he wrote it in, like, it came to him almost in a dream, and he wrote it in like one weekend.
I could see
and
that.
some people are like, oh, well, that makes sense because the movie's bad and it feels like it was written in 3 days. But I find that so interesting when a writer is so struck by an idea that it just like pours out of him. It's so... One thing that I find so interesting about the film is that it strikes such a balance between utter chaos and utter control. Mm-hmm. Because the story and the emotions behind them are just chaos. Everything that's happening on screen and the plot of the movie is chaos, but the movie itself is made with such control. Like, the technical aspects of the film, I think, are stunning. I think it is legitimately ridiculous that it was not nominated for Oscars, for the cinematography, for the production design of that house, for the sound design of that house. The fact that this film won Razzies and not Oscars is one of the biggest crimes of cinema of like the past decade, I think. It's the craft of the film is so meticulous in service of these chaotic emotions in a way that Wes Anderson has never appealed to me as a filmmaker. I know that's going to be blasphemous probably to some listeners, but I can never get on board with Wes Anderson because everything feels so controlled. Right. That there's no, it's so precious in a way because it's so controlled, but there's no spontaneity. And to me, like joy comes from spontaneity, and without room for any spontaneity, I find so little joy in Wes Anderson movies. They're so cold and removed to me.
Well, his movies are also basically always screaming out, like, look, isn't this, he always like he's going to stick his head into the frame, but like, look how whimsical this all is. See how the colors and everything's symmetrical? Yeah, I know, I get it.
Yeah, and like looking at a frame from the film they're beautiful, but it's like looking at a painting. Right. And to me, Mother has the same level of control of its craft, but in service of an experience that actually is interested in provoking emotion. And yeah.
It's almost the way, the fact that he did like bang this script out in a week or so, it almost feels like the biblical allegory was, I think you even mentioned this, is just basically a framework. Like he put that in there to, I don't know, to provide a surface level structure to it, and then really had so much more to say baked under the surface. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was designed to be the easy read of the movie. Right. just to reward repeat viewings or just to make them experience that much richer for people that were willing to dig into it. I also think the cinematography in here is really impressive, because it's all I feel like it's all super close-ups on Jennifer Lawrence, because it's so closely told from her perspective that it's just swinging camera movements of her looking around at everything happening. And again, I haven't rewatched it since theaters, and I'm going off of memory. That's how much I remember all of this. Or like intense like close-ups just right on her face as she's processing everything that's happening around her. It's her performance. It's interesting that she didn't really get a lot of attention for this role, because she has been such an Oscar darling up to this point. She even got nominated for Joy, which I really didn't care for that much as a film.
Right.
To the point where it was, she puts a film out there and they were like, oh, we got to nominate J-Law. But this wasn't a poorly received movie either. I just checked 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, so like it was mixed, but. The people that love it, like you, they loved it. Like they were really about it. I know a lot of people that had this in their top 10 for that year.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't as poorly received critically as maybe some people remember. It was, if we want to talk about reception, though, that it got that infamous F cinema score.
I mean, well, not surprised. I mean,
no, but I do have to give what studio released it? Paramount. I do have to give Paramount credit for releasing it wide. I mean, that is so crazy. And maybe it was a huge mistake because it's not really a wide release movie. No. But I mean, I saw that film in the multiplex that I go to see Marvel movies. Right. I didn't see it at our local little indie theater where I go to see most Oscar films. It played. There was a Marvel superhero next door, and then Darren Aronofsky's Mother. And yeah, that did result in an F cinema score because wider audiences were like, "What is this?" Right. But I mean, I think it's so cool to put a movie like that out there for everyone to see it. It's so original, and I mean, even that F cinema score, made people want to go see it. They're like, what is this thing that is, stoking such controversy? So I do have to give Paramount props for its release strategy. Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes a statement either one way or another. And it's interesting usage of Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer. These like character roles that because they're big stars and Oscar nominated. I think Pfeiffer has one actually. Actors, to have them in here where their role is basically just in the first half of the film, kind of to serve the greater journey of Mother. And that's the other thing, how blatant the allegory is for this film. Like none of the characters even have names. If you look at like the synopsis of it, it's all man, woman, him, mother. It's like nobody has. So it's he wasn't even really trying to tell a story, like a plot-driven story. I think that's it's a really. It's an approach that most moviegoers are not going to be receptive to. So yeah, I think in hindsight, Paramount was probably kicking themselves and like, shit, we should have just like rolled that out little by little and like played to the markets and see if we could build buzz. Because I remember even back in the day, like Chicago, which went on to win Best Picture, was showing up little by little, like 500 screens, 800 screens, so like that. And I think that would have made a lot more sense for Mother. So what do you think about Jennifer Lawrence's performance? And I think I even heard like some people afterwards, like on Twitter, being like, with a more of a misogynistic read of the movie, just because she like gets battered near death by the end of the film. What are your take on that? Yes, I think she's incredible. I think it's, if not her best, it is definitely one of her 2 or 3 best performances. And she carries the movie. Like you said, she's in every shot. Literally every single shot is either extreme close up on her face, over her shoulder, or from her POV. Yep. Those are the only 3 shots used in the entire movie. It's composed of variations on those 3 shots. And there's such an interesting arc to her character, which I was really paying attention to this most recent time I watched it. She's so reserved at the beginning and so domesticated and quiet and just brewing tea for the men and fixing up the house for her husband. And by the end, she's just so primal and unleashing all fury, and she just got the range on display in her performance. It's like from 0 to 11, and it's really remarkable. And I do think I'm familiar with the allegations of misogyny, like you mentioned, but I don't know. I don't think depicting that is endorsing that. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. Definitely the sequence of her getting the shit kicked out of her and called all these horrible names is definitely probably the most uncomfortable part of the whole movie. But I mean, it's by
design.
Really,
it's not glorifying it or anything.
Right. That's really the point. That's the point of the movie, at which he's like reaching his thesis about this planet and our horrific treatment of it and how it's going to literally blow up in our faces. And it's that moment is so full of despair and fury, and I can't imagine watching it and thinking, oh, like Darren Aronofsky just like wants to beat up women. Like that's not the point. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable and horrified.
There's something to you mentioned about. We've talked a lot about the allegory of the movie because that's again kind of the point. I mean, they like make love and then the next morning she's like, I'm pregnant. So you're not supposed to take this at face value. There's something to be said for literal storytelling versus metaphorical storytelling or allegorical. And that's why the cinema score doesn't not surprise me in the slightest. Just because if you're not willing to go along with this movie and what it's trying to do, if you're fighting it the whole way through, you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to see the thesis that as you said that Aronofsky's trying to get toward here. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I agree with you that I don't necessarily think it's misogynistic. I can understand that read, but it really is just. At that point, they have the overarching motif, I guess, of the sink, and people keep going, leaning on it or sitting on it or making out while they're like jumping on top of the sink, things like that. And I think that's a really clever device to track her frustration over the course. I mean, first it starts with an uninvited guest, and then 2, and then there's a whole family. Which how random is it to see Domhnall Gleeson just in the middle of this movie? I had no clue he was in it. I don't even think he's not in the trailer whatsoever. They basically in the trailer just show you this mysterious older couple that shows up, and then chaos ensues.
And his brother is played by his real life brother.
Yes, that's right. But the sink really, I think, is the way that he tracks her growth and her kind of ongoing sense of agency over the course of where she's just like, oh, do you mind? And then by the end, she's like, get off the, she's like freaking out about the sink. And of course, it leads to everything going berserk. The flood. Yeah, exactly. Literally the flood. And you can relate that directly to, Sodom and Gomorrah and all like everything escalating. Humanity is escalated to a point that God is literally, all right, I need to wipe it off and we'll start over again. So what do you think about, well, Javier Bardem is great in this too, but again, he's great in everything. What do you think about the way that things turn after because is it after the flood where that's where it just doesn't even attempt to make any kind of narrative sense anymore whatsoever, and it's just like people are just randomly showing up, and Kristen Wiig is there for some reason.
Talk about random appearances. She was hilarious. What a delight.
But it's just perfect cast. It's perfect to have someone like there in that because you'll have a dream and you're like, yeah, you and I were over here, and then Kristen Wiig was there for some reason.
She was shooting people execution style, and then she got blown up. It feels like a dream, absolutely. And you just triggered a memory in me of the first time I watched it, and the feeling of how quickly things get out of control in the second half of the movie. And so everyone gets driven out of the house by the flood at about the halfway mark. Things kind of reset. She gets pregnant, and then the second half of the movie starts, and things get so crazy so fast. And what that reminded me of the first time I watched it was, do you know have you ever been to like a natural history museum, and on the floor there will be like a little chart of like human history or the history of the planet, laid out, in proportion to time. And there's such a long time, like just the planet exists. It was formed and then nothing. And then the first, single-celled life down here. And then you get to dinosaurs close to the end, and then they're gone. And then all of human history is like a sliver,
Yeah.
at the very end of the timeline. And that's how quickly we've come and spread across this planet and basically wrecked it beyond repair. That's the arc of this movie to me, is like, it starts slow, things get a little crazy, there's a little explosion of life around the middle, and then it sort of dies out again, and then all of human history happens in the last 15 minutes of the movie, of a 2-hour movie. And it maps that arc to me, which I think is a really cool idea, and executed really well.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you could also see the flood and then the death of the baby as sort of signifying, to go to the biblical thing, the Old and New Testament, that the fact that happens halfway through and the narrative shifts. And I also was thinking about going back to the roller coaster comparison, that it's like ratchets up, click, 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 levels out, and then woo, like that free fall down, like super steep, just like, what the hell is happening? The onslaught of violence and just chaos. And I don't know, I keep going back to the word chaos because I don't know how else to describe it. And I really need to go back and rewatch at least that last sequence, just because that there's so much significance built into every single detail of that, just as far as the environmental message is concerned, and the larger interpretations that we've mentioned.
Yeah, and I think there's something so true about this movie in the way that I don't think I'm wrong if I say that most of us go about our lives these days with sort of just a base level of anxiety underneath everything, about the direction of our country, about the state of our planet, especially if you're having children around now. I don't know if this is something you thought about when you were having a kid, but like, what kind of world are we bringing children into? Is it still going to be here when they're old? Right. When is the world going to end?
My daughter was born December 2016. Literally, my wife was gonna give birth like 2 weeks after the election. So yeah, that was very much in our mindset as far as where we were gonna go the next 4 years and beyond.
Mm-hmm. I think this movie taps into that primal fear that's underneath all of us in the way that she taps into that primal ooze underneath the house at the end, and I felt very similarly this past year. This is going to be a really weird comparison maybe, but I got a lot of the same feelings out of First Reformed.
I could see that.
That film is also all about the anxiety of the future of our planet and concerns about bringing new life into this planet given the state that it's in. They're very similar thematically, and whereas Mother is sort of the chaotic, fiery version of that feeling, First Reformed is the more controlled, icy version of that feeling, but they both have that same primal scream feeling to me of these filmmakers, these writer-directors just having such anxiety about the state of the world, and the only way they know how to deal with it is to put that fear and anxiety and anger and everything on screen.
Yeah, Paul Schrader just literalizes it basically and has Ethan Hawke vocalize those themes, whereas Aronofsky bakes it into multiple layers of interpretation and analysis, and you have to kind of do a little more homework and challenges you to think, to try and uncover some of that, which ultimately is why I admire the movie, even if I don't necessarily walk away with it being like that's a masterpiece. So I sort of alluded to this earlier, but the scene with the baby and the way that the baby is born, and then it really comments on I think the ego of the creator, because whether you're a poet, whether you're a filmmaker or a writer or a podcaster, you're ultimately saying, I have something that I want to say, and you need to hear it. You all need to listen to me. So there's an ego level of that too that I think really plays into this movie, which is why, as a creative person myself, I find the movie and Javier Bardem's character is sort of an analog for Aronofsky's the most satisfying. Like, that's the one that I find the most interesting. It made me want to come home and like really hug my wife and be like, I appreciate everything you do for the family. I hope, I know I'm hard to put up with sometimes and blah, 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 because it's really kind of a wake up call to the toll that it can take when you're a creative person on the people in your life, where literally she helps him birth a new project. I mean, the pregnancy inspires him to finish his work. And that, brings all the adoration of fans, and it raises all kinds of questions of like, well, isn't his family enough? Why is he, kind of trying to please, outsiders as opposed to his wife and his baby? And then the baby becomes like a prop for him to be like, look at my child, and adore him. And of course,
right, it's an extension of him.
Exactly. And as is the way of, especially now with social media and outrage culture, and everybody's pissed about everything, they literally tear it apart. They tear the baby apart. And consume it. They consume it. They're just there to be like, all right, you can. And as a pop culture person who's obviously big into movies and things like that, you'd be like, all right, I'm trying to think of an analogy here. Let's see. Paul Feig's Ghostbusters, or, Ryan Coogler, Black Panther. He's like, I made this movie. Go and check it out. And then some people are like, I love it, and break it down and analyze it and reap the benefits of writing articles about it and making podcasts about it and consuming it that way. And then other people literally are tearing it apart and being like, oh, this is bullshit. It's so overrated, blah, blah, blah. But that image is the one that really sticks with me the most. The baby being carried away, the neck snap, especially, and then the cannibalization literally after. Yeah, like I said, with the 10-month-old at home, I was like, Jesus.
Yeah, there's something interesting there about who art belongs to. Once you deliver it into the world, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It's out of your control. Other people will consume it. If you try to reclaim it, they will tear you apart. Like, people feel such ownership over the art that other people create, and I'm guilty of this too. I mean, it's a natural feeling that, for example, with Game of Thrones, or more accurately with A Song of Ice and Fire, people are so mad at George R.R. Martin that he hasn't finished it. They feel entitled to his work in a way. They feel like they've entered a contract with him and he has broken it by not following through. Because like I said, once you deliver it into the world, it's not yours anymore, and whether that's true or not, or right or wrong, it is sort of beside the point. That's how art works. Once it's put out into the world, it's no longer completely under your control.
Right. I mean, The Last Jedi is the example I should have used instead of Black Panther. That would have been a much more apt version of that divisiveness, which now we're seeing in everything. And I mean, I think it feels to me like in a way celebrating the creation of art, but also as sort of a cautionary tale of just be aware, temper your creative efforts with appreciating those around you and your support system and things like that. So that's why I was kind of inspired by it, to come home and be like, hey, let me do the dishes tonight, honey. You've worked long enough. I don't need to write that article right now or whatever. Kind of tempering and finding that balance, because when you give yourself so completely over to something that you're blind to everything else around you, chaos can ensue. It could wreak havoc on your personal life. Now, whether that's what happened with Aronofsky and his marriage to Rachel Weisz, or his relationship with Jennifer Lawrence, which again is kind of blurring the lines of art and reality, which in a way is kind of makes this movie feel that much more powerful, knowing that the director was in a relationship with her at the time, because he's literally like wringing her out like for her talent for the screen in this movie, to be like,
right.
okay, now and then the movie ends with, obviously spoilers, ends with her giving up the crystal and like basically her heart, her essence to him, and then the movie comes out and then they break up. So yeah, I thought all of that interpretation I think really excites me. It's a hard movie to watch, especially like I said for the last act and the way that all plays out. But you have to admire the balls he had to put this movie out there, especially knowing that we're in a very, I love Marvel movies. I talk about them a lot on this show, and I love all the the big blockbusters. Not all of them, but I love some of them, the good ones. And I think we're in such a the industry has become so homogenized in a lot of ways. We're like, all right, Disney just, perfect example, Disney just bought Fox.
Yep.
And now own, I think, like 40% of the market share of I don't know if it's cinemas or like film or what the deal is there, but they have a tremendous market share now of the entertainment, the media that we consume, to the point that I love the MCU, but every Marvel movie is, whether it's good, great, or terrible, whatever, they all feel the same in some way or another. Even Black Panther or Captain Marvel, the ones that try and have more of a social statement and try and be more distinctive, they still feel like Marvel movies. I can't think of a movie that feels like this movie. It has that originality and that distinctive vision behind it that we don't see in studio films. I mean, look, we're getting Dumbo, Lion King, and Aladdin again, all for some reason. Even though, we've all seen those stories a million times.
I'm already tired.
Exactly, I know. Oh my God. Plus, not to mention another Toy Story. I mean, this feels like the year between, not to harp on Disney so much, but with the Disney Fox deal closing, the fact that they have all these high-profile releases coming out this year, plus the launch of Disney Plus, this feels like the fulcrum point where, from this point forward, it's Disney's world, the Disney world, literally, and we're just living in it.
Yeah, we're in the world
they're
of
taking
Cloud
over.
Atlas. We're in the far future timeline when every single movie is just referred to as a Disney.
I love Cloud
That's what they call
Atlas.
it. Yeah.
That's an interesting movie too.
In that direction. Yeah. That would be an interesting conversation too. I also love that movie.
Yeah. I'll note that for a future podcast then, for definitely. Because I think the Wachowskis are another one where I was just talking to my father-in-law about this last night. I didn't love Jupiter Ascending, but I anytime they come out with anything, I'm going to be there, because there's nothing quite like The Matrix or Cloud Atlas or, going back, even something like Bound. Like, they have a very distinctive voice as filmmakers. So it's something like Speed Racer, which is ridiculous and candy coated and all that stuff. Like, that nobody makes a movie like that. Who would make that? Spielberg wouldn't even make that. And Spielberg is, often cited as one of the best, biggest blockbuster filmmakers of our time and all that. So I'm definitely still on board for whatever Aronofsky does next, just because I want to see what he has to say. Whether I'll love it or hate it is kind of immaterial. I'm invested in his career at this point. And, I understand why this film underperformed. It made like $17 million off of a budget of 30, but it's also kind of disappointing. And
right, like people are always fretting about the disappearance of the mid-budget film.
Right.
Everything's going to be a blockbuster or like tiny, no-budget indie, and there's going to be no in between. And then a studio has the balls to release a film like this wide, and people don't show up to support it. I think it's a shame. Which
is also why it's fitting that we're talking about what is essentially a psychological horror film the weekend that Us is another original psychological horror film that just came out and has made $70 million, which is the highest opening weekend for any original horror film in cinema history. So there are those little fragments of success stories of films that come out that aren't based on a comic or a novel or, a television show or whatever. So I have faith that those still exist. It's just, it's people need to seek them out and give their money, send their money in that direction. And it's unfortunate that Mother didn't, I guess, make its budget back domestically. It has only been a couple years, but I do already feel like it is achieving cult status quite fast.
Yeah, and I do think that the success of Us and the relative failure of Mother, speaks to expectations and what happens when they're subverted or not met. Like Us clearly exists within the framework of horror films and has all the trappings of a horror films. And it's really psychological and sort of tapping into Jordan Peele's own psyches and insecurities and fears the same way that Mother did with Darren Aronofsky. But he's playing within a recognizable sandbox, whereas people just had no idea with Mother. When you completely defy expectations like that, and maybe that's the fault of the marketing when they made it, look like a more traditional horror movie than it ended up being. People say they want unique, and they're tired of movies that all feel and look the same. People complain about the Marvel style, but then when something defies categorization to the extent that Mother does, it's also people sort of rebel against that as well.
Right.
So
I definitely think that Paramount didn't really know how to sell this. And I mean, honestly, I kind of don't blame them. I wouldn't know how to begin trying to appeal to casual moviegoers with this film. Just because it is so different. And that's both, ultimately I think that's both its strength and its weakness.
Absolutely. It is tempting to fit it into the box of, biblical allegory, like we mentioned before. Right. But I think there is so much more to the movie that defies explanation as well. Like I've seen it 3 times now, and I still don't feel like I have every answer. Like, what is the yellow powder that she drinks? Like there's so many layers and so many mysteries, and I think you could think about it and discuss it and watch it multiple times and still not tap into everything. And so I think to dismiss it as so easily explainable is a mistake. I'm glad we've had this conversation. We've talked about things that I hadn't talked about before with the movie, and I'd be interested in I'll be interested in talking about it for years to come with other people and watching it again, and that's what I love about it. Yeah,
definitely. So there you have it. I think if you've seen Mother and you're listening to this, check it out again. It is streaming on Amazon Prime for people that want easy access. I would definitely give it a second viewing. I honestly, after this conversation, I probably will now make the time to go back and watch it again, because I'll have the hindsight of all the interpretations, because I watched it before all the think pieces came out. I think I may have even seen it opening weekend, locally at least. And so I'm definitely interested in revisiting it and digging a little bit deeper into what Aronofsky has to say with this one. So, Jefferson, why don't you tell people a little bit where they can find you as far as social media and things like that?
Great. Yeah. Check out my site at thin-gold-line. You can follow the site on Twitter at awardstgl, and you can follow me personally on Twitter at Mr. Screen Addict.
Thank you so much for being on the show. This was a great conversation, and I'd love to have you back on at some point, maybe to talk about Cloud Atlas or something of that nature.
Absolutely.
There's a lot to dig into that as well. So,
yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jefferson.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
The art of a little KED.